of his that he would use in Skinny Jim, 20 Flight Rock, a lot of the Cochran Brothers stuff. And this was just a variation of a single-string banjo roll that Atkins and a lot of country players played, where you just sort of go up and down the strings. That kind of a thing.
Released in July 1956, the first Eddie Cochran solo single, Skinny Jim. By now, Eddie was concentrating on studio work, making loads of songwriting demos for the publishing company American Music. As luck would have it, the company booked time at a little Los Angeles studio called Gold Star. Its co-owner was recording engineer Stan Ross.
Eddie Cochran came in to do demos. Now, American Music booked Wednesdays at Gold Star Studios every Wednesday from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. weekly, every week. And they came in with maybe 4 or 5 demos to do. And Eddie had to do maybe 2 or 3 of them. Glenn Campbell maybe would do 1 of them. And Eddie Cochran came in, sweet guy, wonderful guy. I had a lot of fun with him. He's always good-natured, friendly. I said, boy, what a nice guy. And I started recording him in that same studio, Studio B at Gold Star. We had 2 mono tape machines and a console, a very simple mono console. It was not a stereo studio. It was similar to Sun Studios in Memphis. They had mono studios the same as ours. And I was using on Eddie Cochran tape reverb at 7.5 speed and tape reverb at 15. And I was getting the same sound. And then all of a sudden I listened to Elvis Presley, and there we are. We're matching Elvis Presley.
Recorded in Gold Star Studio B in the summer of 1956, 20 Flight Rock. It was never a hit, but has classic status forever because of Eddie's wonderful performance of it in the Jane Mansfield movie, The Girl Can't Help It. A glorious Technicolor showcase for 2 other rock and rollers, Little Richard and Gene Vincent. As Rob Finnis explains, Eddie's debut on screen was on the one hand mesmerising, but on the other, a little misleading.
They actually tried very hard to make him to an Elvis clone in that movie. His hair's slightly darkened. They've given him fake sideburns, given him a bit of mascara, and he actually didn't really look as he appears in The Girl Can't Help It. That's a kind of Elvis-y version of Eddie Cochran. So he got the movie role before he'd become a rock and roll singer. So it was very much a back-to-front thing. So they'd made this record of 20 Flight Rock at Gold Star Studios. Very crude but effective record. He performed it in the movie, and it was scheduled to be his first release, and actually was given a number and it was ready to roll, and then they pulled it at the last minute because they suddenly decided it would be stronger for him if he cut this cover version of a song that was breaking in the southern part of the States called Sitting in the Balcony by Johnny D. So they rushed him in to cover this record, and he did a pretty good job. They spent the whole night recording this thing with layering it with overdubs. And it took off. It was quite a big hit, and eclipsing the original by Johnny D. And of course at that time he was also in the film, so it was a kind of double whammy. It worked out very well for him.
It seemed like a fairy tale, with everything going according to plan. Eddie Cochran was the first rock and roll singer to sign with the newly launched Liberty Records, and he'd zoomed into the American charts with his very first single for the label in March 1957.
Sitting in the Balcony is a good example of Cochran's guitar playing, where he's overdubbing guitar parts and also using the detuning technique that he used an awful lot in the early part of his career. Sitting in the Balcony is one of those strange records. It's a kind of a comedy novelty type thing, but by detuning he was able to get a very deep, powerful sound which really lifts the song, and is probably the most remarkable thing about the song in fairness. But here's how he did it. Obviously, on Eddie's version, he's overdubbing the on top of the. But when you listen to the song's in the key of G. Now, if you was to play that on standard tuning, you would have to play that first guitar riff here. Doesn't quite have the same depth and power to it as if you detune and play it here. So that was another one of his many studio tricks and guitar wizardry.
Shortly after his first hit, he recorded the only album ever released during his lifetime, Singing to My Baby. 2 decades later, Darrell Hyam discovered the LP at a very early age, and his life was changed forever.
I heard Eddie's music for the first time when I was about 4 years old. And at the time, it was really a question of just going through my mum and dad's record collection and picking out any record cover that looked interesting. So consequently, they had a couple of Elvis albums, and I loved them. And then I discovered this Eddie Cochran album, and it was recorded just after Eddie had signed to Liberty Records, and he hadn't quite found his rock and roll feet at the time. He was very much doing what Liberty felt was the right way to push him, and that was as a kind of a cross between Pat Boone and Elvis Presley. So it was very sort of pop rock. But I loved that album, and I still love it today. It's my favourite period of his career, if you like. I still listen to that album a hell of a lot and love it. And I think the main reason was because the front cover of that album is very dark and atmospheric. There's 2 headshots of Eddie, and in the middle there's a picture of him sitting on a couch. It's taken from the waist up, and he's got this most beautiful looking Gretsch guitar. And that was it. I think the guitar and the music seemed to go with it as well. You know, the music is very echoey and atmospheric. And you put those 2 things together, very strong image, great music, and that's always going to be a winner, you know. There were some great numbers on there, but it was light years away from Summertime Blues and Something Else and Come On Everybody.
While Drive-In Show was a minor hit in the States, Eddie was on tour in Australia with his co-stars from The Girl Can't Help It, Little Richard and Gene Vincent. This was the famous tour, by the way, when Little Richard tossed his jewellery into the Hunter River in Sydney and pledged to forsake rock and roll. While they were there, they were featured on the Ampol radio show, hosted by Jack Davey.
Now, here's a boy, and a nice boy. A quiet boy to talk to, but when he starts to rock and roll, he gets excited like the rest. Eddie, tell us a little about yourself. You're a single man?
Yeah, that's right, and I live in Hollywood, California.
Hollywood, California.
Yeah.
And how many Cadillacs do you have?
2.
2? How did you get into music? Guitar playing first or vocal?
Yeah, it was real funny. I was a guitar player, and I was sitting in this recording session one day, and just sitting there playing to myself, and this guy walked in, and he was a producer, and he asked me if I wanted to be in The Girl Can't Help It, and I told him yes.
If you wanted to?
If I wanted to be in The Girl Can't Help It.
Don't run your words together.
That was a rock and roll picture.
And from then on, it stuck with you.
Yeah, that's right.
When Eddie returned from Australia, he joined the bill of the biggest show of stars for 57 and toured with Buddy Holly and the Crickets, Chuck Berry, Fats Domino and Paul Anka. But he was struggling to find a record to match the top 20 success of his debut hit from earlier in the year. However, in May 1958 he struck gold when he recorded Summertime Blues, his only single to reach the American top 10 and his first hit in the UK. If you wanted to explain what rock and roll was all about to a visiting Martian, this record would be a pretty good place to start. It's got all the ingredients, and as Stan Ross and Darrell Hyam explain, the magic in the grooves comes from a combination of a live backing track with creative overdubbing on top.
They were done and not repeated too often, and it was live. It was live. The basic tracks were done live. Everybody played at the same time. Bass, drums, guitars, at the same time. It wasn't a bass going down, then a